Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Candace King with The Village Media, and this is BLK250 Conversations. When we talk about the making of American democracy, the story is often told through founding documents like the Declaration of Independence and other political and cultural institutions. However, there's another story that often gets ignored, and this is a narrative that was shaped by generations of Black people who fought for freedom, tested the boundaries of citizenship, and demanded that the ideals of democracy apply to them as well. In part one of the Black 250 essay series, historian Dr. Nika Denny examines the role that Black freedom fighters played in building and reshaping the democracy that we know and hold true today. These freedom fighters remind us that the Black political struggle is inextricably linked with American democracy. Joining me now for Black 250 Conversations is Dr. Nika Denny, who is Associate Professor of History at Washington and Lee University. She is a Black feminist scholar specializing in African American intellectual history. Dr. Denny is also the author of Mary Ann Shadd Cary, Essential Writings of a 19th Century Black Radical Feminist. She is also the founder and CEO of Diaspora Discoveries, an educational travel company that coordinates group trips to the Caribbean with an emphasis on Black history and culture. Dr. Denny, thank you so much for being with us. This is a little bit of a reunion for us.
Thank you for having me, Dr. King.
And just for our audience, Dr. Denny and I went to the same grad school. We are products of the Du Bois department, so it just brings me so much joy to have her here. But again, just, with your powerful essay, it moves us through different eras of America, the Revolutionary era, Reconstruction, as well as the Civil Rights Movement. And in many ways, with you revisiting these different moments in history, you help anchor us in where we are today. So now that we are at America's 250th anniversary, what do you believe is the story of democracy that we're telling now?
Yeah. Well, I think that in and of itself invites us to question who is the we, right? Because the story that we, being Black people in the United States, are telling about democracy might be very different from what the country at large is telling us about how democracy looks and how successful it has been in the United States. And I prefer to think of democracy in this country as an experiment, right? Because we need to continue tinkering. We need to continue putting the pieces in place to ensure that we actually arrive at a place where we have an inclusive democracy, where we have a multiracial democracy. And so I would like to say that we have ongoing efforts to create the ideal kind of democracy, one in which people truly have a right to be heard, to express themselves without fear of violence, for instance, being able to advocate for what they believe in and not getting fired from their jobs, for instance, because they said something unsavory about other political issues that are affecting the world today. And so I would say that our democracy is under construction, to put it lightly.
That's a really a good way to put it. And, I think one of the things that I appreciate about your piece too is that you sort of bring out these moments or these very powerful vignettes that we can draw from. And so for you, what is the through line throughout these different eras, particularly in the ways that democracy is getting made and in some ways remade throughout these different eras?
Yeah, I would say that there are three through lines that really stand out to me. The first is something that I say to my students all the time. I put it in my book. If I had a catchphrase, this would probably be it. Black people have been saying the same thing for 200 years. There have been different iterations of African Americans really grappling with the same set of questions, shouting from the mountaintops the same points over and over again, right? And by that, I mean that we have continually seen, for the purposes of America 250, we have continually seen that Black people are interrogating this question of what it means to be governed, and also who are the governed in question, right? And so, to the first point, this question of governance, as I write in the article, this country, unfortunately, has been experiencing a white supremacist authoritarian crackdown. I don't need to go into detail about the sordid wrongdoings by the White House and the government at this particular moment in time. But suffice to say that things are not going so well. Not simply for Black people, but for a range of demographics of marginalized citizens. Whether we're talking about LGBTQ populations, whether we're talking about immigrants, we are seeing a lot of crackdowns taking place across the country. Issues having to do with abortion. There are a lot of problems that people are facing. And these are issues of governance in that we see that people are attempting to have a right to self-determination, but one that is constantly under attack in a number of ways. To the second point about who is being governed, that's when we see, I think, that various populations, some of which I've mentioned already, are really trying to mobilize and articulate what it is that they need so that when we are seeing elections taking place, for instance, are their views being represented? When we are seeing protests in the streets, are these people being heard? And so I would say that those are some of the three key through lines that have emerged, not simply today in 2026, but if we're going back to these earlier eras, the American Revolution, right, when we're looking at the civil rights movement, we really see that there's this sort of ongoing contestation for people to be heard, and not simply to be heard, but to actually have decision-making power. These are some through lines that I think we see, and one of the ways that we see that Black people in this country have been saying the same thing for 200 years.
When you talk about contestation, I think one of the figures in your piece that exemplifies this most extraordinarily is Mum Bet. And she was an enslaved woman who also was illiterate. And she overheard her enslaver talking about the Constitution. And from overhearing that, she then goes to sue them and win her freedom. And I think, you know, her story is not only extraordinary just because of, you know, her taking it on in the courts, but I also think that we see a lot of parallels today in the ways in which, you know, Black people are also using the courts to contest their freedom. And so just curious for you, you know, as you've revisited, you know, Mum Bet and, you know, other freedom fighters in this piece, you know, what are some of the lessons that we can take away from their stories?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, when we're talking about Mum Bet, one of the most salient lessons that emerges is that there are different ways of knowing and there are different forms of knowledge that are all valuable, right? I think that Mum Bet is really a testament to Black women's advocacy on behalf of themselves, on behalf of Black communities, even if they might not necessarily have the formal credentials to do so, right? We're talking about someone who, as you mentioned, was not literate, could not read nor write, did not have a formal education. Now, as a history professor, yes, I believe in the value of formal education, but I also recognize college is not for everybody, and not everyone has access to education, more importantly. This does not inherently mean that their perspectives are any less valuable. This does not inherently mean that they cannot understand the world in front of them, right? So when we're talking about Mum Bet and the lessons that we may receive from her, I think that that's one of them, right? That Black people, although they have been systematically shut out of getting access to education at this point in time, nevertheless, we see what's going on, right? We understand how things affect us. I would also say that one of the lessons that we get from earlier generations of Black thinkers and activists is that there is always more work to do. And I don't mean this in a sort of tiring sense, but rather in an uplifting way, right? And I'm saying this in particular because of Mary Ann Shadd Cary. Now, Shadd Cary was an abolitionist, a suffragist, and the first Black woman newspaper editor in North America. One of my favorite historical figures. That's why I wrote my book about her. And this is a book that's a primary source collection of pieces that she wrote, as well as pieces that some of her contemporaries wrote about her. And when I was working on this book, I came across a letter where she basically says, like, hey, sorry I haven't written in a while. I'm just getting over cholera. There was a cholera outbreak in the whole town. I'm so tired. There's not money for this. There's not money for that. There's so much fundraising that needs to be done. And at that point in time, I remember thinking to myself, I don't even want to respond to this email, but here I am reading about someone who got over cholera and is still doing the work, right? And so when I say that there's always more work to be done, and that being one of the lessons, I think that in particular was inspiring to see, right? It was kind of, I think, a swift kick on my end to stop belly aching and do what needs to be done, because our ancestors have survived in some ways things that were much, much worse, right? There was still work to be done. They got up and they did it. Now, that's not to say that our ancestors did not deserve rest and that we ourselves do not deserve rest, because of course we do. But I think that offers inspiration when we can see how previous generations survived, how previous generations were still able to persist and create meaningful livelihoods for themselves, for the people coming up after them, despite the repressive conditions that they face. So I see that as one of the inspirational lessons that we get from looking at African American history or Black history more broadly.
Yeah, and picking up on that thread as well, I think one of the things that I've appreciated about your essay is towards the conclusion, where you offer that African Americans have offered three key reflections on democracy's problems and possibilities, which I'll summate here. You write that one of those things is that the Constitution should apply equally to us, that democracy doesn't shield us from white supremacy. And finally, that we need to cultivate other strategies to protect ourselves. And so, obviously, all three of those I think are very urgent in this moment. But from your perspective, just with everything going on, which of the three feel most salient to you right now, and why?
That question. I would say that cultivating other strategies is the one that feels most salient. And this is partially inspired by the extreme volume of election related text messages that I've been getting every single day. And elections are important. I believe in voting. I vote every single election, but that cannot be the end all be all. We need to cultivate other strategies. We need to participate in mutual aid. We need to raise awareness about issues taking place in our communities. But I think that we need to look beyond the traditional democratic frames, because we see how democracy is not perfect, right? And so we cannot rely on an imperfect system as we strive to create a more perfect world. That being said, I think that it's important to have conversations with people. Conversations that are sometimes going to be really uncomfortable, because it might require some unlearning on the part of ourselves and of whoever we are in conversation with, right? But I think that cultivating other strategies and developing more expansive worldviews, not losing our imagination, being in community with one another are all really significant steps that we can take. Getting involved in organizations. Perhaps you are not an organizer. That is a-okay. Not everyone needs to be an organizer. You can donate money. If you can donate time. And there are always going to be smaller tasks that need to be done, even if you don't want to be at the forefront of a movement anyways. So when I'm talking about cultivating other strategies beyond this traditional democratic frame, what I'm really referring to is not strictly relying on electoral politics, not strictly relying on Democrats or Republicans to save us, because at some point we do need to save ourselves.
Mm, mm. Yeah, thank you so much for, pushing us in that way. And I really appreciated those insights. I think, one of the things that I've actually been asking every essayist and author that comes on Black 250 Conversations is just thinking about what Black 250 means to them, right? Of course, in your piece, you take us through, this extraordinary fight for freedom and for democracy, over these different eras. And now, as we're looking ahead to the next 250, and also, what does Black 250 mean to you?
Yeah. I think what Black 250 means to me is that Black people have always been on our own time, right? There's a certain delay that we have experienced when it comes to constitutional rights, right? There's a concept that Michael Hanchard, another academic, writes about called racial time. And I don't want to butcher his description of racial time, but part of what he's addressing with this is that one of the functions of racism is this kind of time delay that takes place with Black people's access to certain things. Um, and so I think that when that's coming to mind for me as we're talking about Black 250 and the meaning of time here, because we are not operating on the same timeline that white America has operated on, right? For white America, for the country at large, perhaps this democracy is 250 years old. But really, when we're talking about multiracial democracy in the United States, that's only 60 something years old. And so I think that what Black 250 means to me is that, as I mentioned previously, there is more work to be done. Now, as I think about the next 250 years, as a historian, I'm reluctant to predict the future, but I can nevertheless share some hopes. And what I hope is that we can recover from some of these really massive blows that have been dealt to Black communities, to other marginalized populations in recent years by Supreme Court cases, for instance, like Louisiana v. Calais, which appears in the article. I think that there is great possibility to and a lot of work to be done. I feel like I'm just giving everyone homework. I feel like there's a lot of work to be done still because of the extent to which the Supreme Court has played a hand in tilting the scales. Um, I think that with the current composition of the Supreme Court, the effects of their decisions are things that will continue to become manifest for decades to come. I don't think that we have yet to fully see what that looks like. And so, as we move towards the next 250 years, I hope that we can find a way to address the effects of assorted Supreme Court cases. Not only cases having to do expressly with voting rights or African Americans, things like the Dobbs decision, for instance. I think we're going to continue to see the repercussions of those. And so I hope that we are prepared to continue to pay attention to Supreme Court cases and other notable decisions, notable policies, laws, elections that are going to cause a sort of ripple effect in the coming years.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Denny, for that. And yes, I know historians, your line of work is in interpreting the events, not predicting them, but I think you steer us in such a helpful direction. So thank you so much again. And once more for our audience, Dr. Denny's essay is live on the Village Media's website, thevillagemedia.com/BLK250. She's the author of the essay Black Freedom Fighters and the Making of American Democracy. Thank you again, Dr. Denny, for being here with us today and also just for such a riveting discussion. Your essay was so thorough, so powerful, and I highly encourage everyone here to give it a read.
Thank you so much for having me.
Take care.